Welcome back to Intentional Trips. I am Lindy Eman, and we are starting the trip section of our journey. I am starting this story when I left for Costa Rica at the end of March of 2021. There's a lot that happened before then, but the things that need to get told will be told kind of as they come back up throughout the story. As I mentioned in the introduction, so much of the journey that I didn't know I was embarking on, right? This healing journey, this exploration, this finding of myself. The true frame of that ended up being this journey back to quite literally everywhere on earth that I had ever been that had been significant to me, and connecting to and in some way, kind of saving the versions of me who had been there before, where the veil of, space and time was thinner, really connecting and realizing that the voice that I had heard in all of those, every past version of me, the thing that kind of was in my heart being like, you've got to keep moving. You know that there's something out there. You know that this is going to be okay. Recognizing that that voice was always my own, coming to me from the future. And, that it became, this act of going back to literally kind of reclaim her. And all of that really opened. It's like the pivot point, right? Was when I left for Costa Rica at the end of March 2021. I stepped into this current that was, I had stepped into the magic flow of travel many times in my life, which is what had, kept pulling me back to all of this, had pulled me everywhere I'd ever been on earth. And there was always something that had allowed me to kind of turn back away from the thing that I knew that was calling me. And once I had gone, yes, where our story begins, Costa Rica 2021, there was no going back after that. To give you a little bit of context for life leading up to that moment, I had been a flight attendant. I had graduated flight attendant training in early October of 2019. So I had basically worked for about 6 months. That was one of the many band-aids that I had kind of, hodgepodge together in my life before all of this, where I was just like, well, maybe I can have like a normal life kind of and still travel. And if I'm a flight attendant, then I can, in the days that I'm not working, I can be all over the world, which I did. I would literally fly to Paris for a day just because I could. But it was part of this. It was a beautiful life. And it was also part of this version of me, right? That was really just like wanting things to feel okay somehow in a reality that I knew wasn't completely true to me. And this is all part of the journey, right? Like that's I needed to do that to understand that wasn't right? Like all of this is perfect. I want to be very clear about that anything, people really like to label things good and bad and like, oh, it's so horrible that happened. And it's like, it's not like all of this, everything that has ever happened has been part of this incredible journey, right? And it's like, it's all perfect. Um, Anyway, I digress. So I had been a flight attendant for about 6 months, and always knowing that that was an interim thing. I had told myself that on my days off, that I was really going to be diving into like figuring out what I was supposed to be doing, right? Really wanted to be writing, really wanted to be figuring out a way to kind of make the universe that I knew was calling me a reality, but I was doing it half in and half out of, you know, yeah, having this job and then also using my free time to kind of just soul search. Um, and then COVID hits, and obviously, flying is no longer a thing. And my airline, I think most of the airlines ended up offering a voluntary leave of absence. My understanding is that in order for the airlines to receive federal bailout money, they weren't allowed to actually furlough anyone, but they could kind of be like, but if you want to take a furlough, you can. Um, and I remember talking to my therapist about this in March of 2020 and basically being like, And at the time, I didn't know if I would be eligible for unemployment if I took the voluntary leave of absence. If you remember that time, I know a lot of people try not to, but if you do remember that time, there was just so much uncertainty, right? It was like, is this going to be 2 weeks? LOL. Is this going to be years? Like, what does unemployment, there was just everything was scrambling into place. And so I wasn't sure if I would be eligible for unemployment if I took this leave of absence. And I knew that if I stayed at work, part of my union contract as a flight attendant was even if there weren't flights going, I was guaranteed a certain amount of income every month through the airline. So it was kind of like, what do you do, right? And I remember talking to my therapist and just being like, the truth is I'm only in this job for the flight benefits and the health benefits. And what I actually want is the time and space to figure out what I'm meant to be doing. And maybe this is a gift, and maybe it's also insane. Because, it's like I could see that. I could feel the thing in me that was just like, but if you had this time, like what would you do with it, right? And also being like, and also just really being faced with the fact that thousands, millions of people were losing their jobs. I had friends who were getting laid off. It was like the first sign of the pandemic and people were losing their jobs. And for me to then be sitting there being like, I kind of have this luxury of choice where I can't be fired. And yet I might still choose to not let myself go, but like walk away from this. And so I was really just kind of conflicted about it. Yeah, and I just remember my therapist being very, very, of course, she didn't tell me what to do, but just being very supportive of the fact that it's like, it's not crazy for you to want to just kind of trust this, right? And so I ended up taking the leave of absence and with the intention of being like, okay, however much time this is, we're gonna be kind of figuring stuff out. And I was, in the end, eligible for unemployment, which at the time, they were giving extra subsidies and all of that. There was money coming in. I had also kind of devised a situation when I was living in Chicago where I was living effectively rent-free. I was helping another friend who owned a house. The money that I had coming in from one place was equaling out to what I was spending to live where I was spending. So now I'm living rent free. I have income coming in from the government. And the day after, so I applied for the leave of absence in April. And on May 1st of that year, the airline that I worked for every quarter, basically like if you were ever on a flight, right, and you had a really good experience with the flight attendant or a gate agent or whatever, you can go online and kind of just be like, I was on flight blah blah, and the crew was really wonderful. And when you do that, all of those things go into this large drawing, and once a quarter the airline pulls a few names out of this literally hundreds of thousands of entries, and they award a prize randomly to the names that happen to get drawn out of this massive, massive bucket. So my leave of absence goes into effect, the 30th of April is the last day that I'm technically working. May 1st is when the leave of absence goes into effect. On April 30th, the last day that I was technically working, the company does their first quarterly drawing. They do it virtually, obviously. There's this great video of this moment. And the flight attendant who was pulling the names pulls my name out. At the top tier, they have basically like they pull a few names out for like some money, they pull a few more names out for a little bit of money, and then they pull 10 names out to win $10,000. Out comes my name, the last day that I'm technically working for this company until my leave of absence goes into effect. There's actually this great video because my last name has like a lot of letters in it. So very rarely do people pronounce it the way that my family pronounces it. They kind of just make their own stuff up. There's this great video of the split screen of the flight attendant pulling my name out, and she's like, Lindy, and she's trying to like pronounce my name. And the CEO of the airline, this massive international legacy carrier, right, is on the other screen, and he's like, as she's trying to pronounce my name, the guy literally does that thing when you're just kind of like it doesn't matter, move on, I just see it being like, okay, whatever. Like this person won 10,000. Her name doesn't matter. Um, which I've always just been tickled by. But anyway, universe rewards the fact, right, that I've taken this leap of faith. Um, so I have this money coming in. I'd also, because while I was still working as a flight attendant, I'd been taking pictures and videos of the empty airports around the United States because it was eerie. Because I was an essential worker, so I was working and traveling in late March and early April of that year. And I had ended up selling some of those pictures and videos to to agencies that were making ads and using basically content. I had sold this content that I had created. So I'd had all of this money coming in, right, for a year. Now if we're fast forwarding back to March 2021. And I hadn't been spending anything. I had been buying food, rent free, pandemic, right? There's nothing to do. Uh, so I had effectively just kind of, it wasn't millions of dollars, but I had money, and I had spent a year really deep diving. Of course it was COVID, so there was just a lot of like making sure that I was okay, that it wasn't like a horrendously productive time. And I had really been diving deeply into my own consciousness, into my own being, right, at that time. And again, this kind of perfect storm ended up happening where, at the start of 2021, as vaccines start rolling out, my airline flight attendants in my state were in the second wave of people to get vaccinated. It was basically like doctors and nurses first, and then, the next line, we were included in that. And my airline basically was like, we very strongly recommend and eventually mandated, right? If you're coming back to work, get vaccinated. And yeah. And so we did for that. And they called me back to work for the month of March. I think I was vaccinated in February. And in March, they're like, all right, all hands on deck. But the thing is, no one else on Earth, right, was able to travel yet. Only the people that could work the flights were technically good to travel. The rest of the world was still completely shut down. So I was working in March, technically, of 2021, but I worked like 5 flights maybe, and the company realizes this, and they're basically just like, you know what? Never mind. We were premature. We don't want to be paying you. You guys, you can take a leave of absence again. So now I apply for the leave of absence for the month of April. But now I'm sitting in the situation where all of the science that's coming back again at the time, right? We're putting ourselves in 2021 brain with what we had. Everything that's coming out is saying that if you are somebody who is vaccinated, you can't be spreading this virus, or you're very unlikely to be. I am sitting there now being like, well, I don't have to work. My 30th birthday is at the start of April. I feel comfortable traveling because obviously, like the year before, I wasn't going to go anywhere. I didn't, because for me it was never about me getting sick. It was about getting other people sick, especially going to countries where health infrastructure was different than the US. I was just like, that morally, that didn't sit well with me. But now I'm like, well, I got all this money, and I got all this time, and I got all this data saying that that I'm not going to hurt no one, and I got nowhere to be. So I'm going to go to Costa Rica. um, and Costa Rica actually was somewhere that I had been kind of averse to, if I'm honest, for a really long time. I kind of had this idea of it in my head as being somewhere that was very, it's weird to talk about now because I have such a love for Costa Rica. But I had seen so much of kind of the yoga influencer, American who just moved to a developing country to kind of like pretend like they're one with the trees, but really you're just kind of exploiting. It just I felt like the country I knew I would love, but I was like the type of other travelers there it kind of felt similar to like a Bali or a Tulum to me. And so for most of my travels, I'd kind of just been like, I don't know, I'm just like not that interested in it. But at the time, it was a country that was open. I was able to go there. I had some very important conversations with a few very dear friends who, one of whom has family that is from there. His one side of his family all hails from Costa Rica, and another one who's like heart and guidance I just trust so deeply. And he was just like, go to Costa Rica. It's like that, like you cannot understand until you're there. You just need to go. Um, and again, this is something that I really talked over with my therapist, because it was like, it was that inner knowing that I was like, I know I need to do this, right? And still the layers of me that were like, but I felt wrong about it, right? Where I'm like, at the end of the day, I am just, even though I technically believe that I'm, safe in the context of what that pandemic was, from safe from harming other people, that it's like, but other people don't know that, right? If I'm walking around anywhere, no one knows anything. You're not just like this. Well, I guess at a certain point we were telling everyone our vaccination status. Um, but yeah, I had a lot of feelings about it. And at the same time, I was like, I know I need to do this. And so, long story long, I ended up at the end of March. I worked my last trip for the month. It was an overnight in Pittsburgh. And I got home, um, got some things together, saw a friend very briefly for a few days, who actually the friend who helped encourage me to go to Costa Rica. He will come up a lot in this. And yeah, ended up getting on a plane, flying down to Dallas. And then on a flight I shouldn't have been able to get on also, because I had my flight benefits, right? And because I was working that month, I had all of the active benefits of a working flight attendant, which includes being able to sit in a spare jump seat on an aircraft. So because you fly standby, right? So it's free if you fly standby, but obviously you're not guaranteed a ticket. And there had been enough like demand. It was a weird time for travel because there weren't nearly as many flights that would normally go. Normally between Chicago and Dallas, there's, dozens of flights every day. Now there's only a few, but there was enough demand that all of those flights were basically full. And so I get to the airport. I was, I think, 17th on the standby list for a flight that is like oversold. But I'm the only person on that standby list who is eligible to take the jump seat. And so I end up getting a seat, the only seat that's available, because the flight is completely sold. So nobody else on standby is able to get on the aircraft. And I go to the back of the airplane. I'm doing the standard kind of, flight attendant thing where you're like, I'm saying hi to, everybody who's working, and they're having the same chat that they have every time about COVID and masks, and, the same thing. And I say, thanks for the lift down. And yeah. And they do their thing. The aircraft door closes. And after a minute or two, and I'm sitting in the jump seat in the back galley, after the door closes, one of the flight attendants comes to the back, and she was like, I don't know how this happened. She's like, I don't know how this happened, but the door's closed, so like we're done boarding. But there's an empty seat in the exit row, window seat in the exit row, if you want to sit there instead of the jump seat. And I was like, that's not, there were 17 people on standby and this flight was oversold. And she's like, I have no idea how this has happened, but that seat. And it wasn't, everyone was accounted for. Like it just happened. And I was like, well, sure. So I ended up going from basically, I shouldn't have even gotten on this aircraft, to then getting the janky seat in the back, to then getting like the cushiest seat imaginable. That should be impossible. Universe, again, lighting that kind of path of being like, you're doing the right thing. And this is the thing, if you're somebody who travels in a way that is just like, akin to how I do it, where it's the magic and it's the adventure and the yearning, and you're stepping into that flow, right? For me, the second that you get on the plane, that's when, it's really when you start kind of like going to the airport. It can be whenever, but there's layers of when it kind of hits and the magic starts, whatever. And it just felt like these runway lights, honestly, of like, this is the way, that it's like, you are doing the right thing. Any doubt, any fear that I had about like, am I supposed to be doing this? It was just like, nope, like, here you go. You're on the right track. And flew down to Dallas, ended up getting to stay in a hotel for free, thanks to one of my other flight attendant friends who had basically a hotel room provided by the airline that she wasn't using. So I was able to stay in that room. And then the next morning, I woke up and got on a flight from Dallas down to Costa Rica with no plan, nothing. And, booked one night in a hostel. That's kind of normally what I do. I'll book the first night's accommodation somewhere just so I kind of know where I'm going to be sleeping. And then I kind of figure it out once I'm on the ground. And yeah, did that. And it was so surreal, right? Going from, at this point, quite literally a year of lockdown. It was probably like a year and 10 days, give or take. To then just crossing a border, leaving US airspace to begin with, right? And there's this thing that happens in me because my soul is not meant to be in the United States. It never has been. I have known this my entire life. It has taken me a very, very, very long time to come to understand, to come to terms with, to come to be able to articulate. And the thing is, like, there's no real way to articulate it. No one will ever fully understand the way that anyone feels, really, right? But with this, it's just like, on a cellular level, my entire life, I have rejected that country. It has never felt right. It has never felt like home. Humans there feel like home. I have had beautiful life and love and relationships and things there. And I never have felt fully right there once in my life. And so there's this weight that gets lifted the second that I leave US airspace. And I had kind of, it's like you can intellectually know and remember things, but feeling them, experiencing them is such a different thing. And so all of a sudden and the last time I had left the United States before lockdown started, my sister and I had gone to Barcelona in February for Valentine's Day. We'd done a trip together. So at this point, it's been, 13 and a half months since I had left US airspace. And I literally can feel the plane cross that threshold. And it's just this like massive weight that gets lifted off of my being that I in some way knew I had been carrying, but also like could not understand how I had been carrying it until I felt it leave. And then to land in a new place, in a place that was so alive, right? In a time where everything felt so dead. And to just get out of the airport. And there's such an incredible magic about countries that are just a little bit more like chaotic is the word that is coming to mind. And I don't mean that as like the country as a whole or, politically, or it's just that it's like things are fast and traffic's just weaving all over the place. And, people they're more alive. They're more vivacious. It's just so different than the way everything is structured and, ruled in, like America and a lot of, European places. It's just, yeah, Central America, Southeast Asia, just kind of this like robust energy. So getting out of the airport and just and it's hot, and there's just, and it's everyone's speaking a different language, and it's all of this stuff that I'm like, oh my God, this still exists. This exists, and you're home. And yeah, stepping back into that current, and getting in a cab and just going to this hostel. And I had booked a private room in a hostel for that night in San Jose. And walking into a hostel, and hostels are somewhere that I've actually never really felt that comfortable, even when I was younger. I've always been quite introverted and always quite particular about who I spend time with, and honestly, quite shy isn't the right word. Maybe shy sometimes, but just like a lot of social anxiety and a lot of just kind of like, I feel like I don't belong, right? And so being in hostels at any point in my life, there was always kind of this thing in me that was like, other people are like cool and travelers and backpackers, and they can all make friends and just kind of be chill. And then I was always feeling like, like, what am I do? Like, hello, I too am a person that would like a friend. Like, it always felt, yeah, I don't know. And I've come to, like, on the journey, I'm like, I just like being alone, and I always meet the people that I'm meant to meet, right? I don't need to force that. Like, I would rather spend a month alone, not having a conversation with anyone, and then meet one incredible traveler through happenstance, which always happens the way it's supposed to, right? And have an incredible conversation, or have a weekend where I really befriend someone, but then, after that, it's like I go back into my solitude. Like, I would rather have that than have a random night out with like 7 people that I don't really connect with, but just for the sake of like being with other people. Like, that's never really interested me. I've forced myself to do it a lot when I was younger, but it's never felt right for me. So anyway, I step into this hostel, and again, it's like that thing of like, you forget what it's like until you're doing it. And there's people there from all over the world. And I remember at one point, there's like, in the little common area, there were this guy and this girl, man and woman, probably in their 20s, and they were talking in English about different, like, trading, you should go here, I've been here, oh, I loved this, don't go there. They're speaking in English together, but it was neither of their first languages. They were both European. You can tell with their accents, like, I think one was German, I don't know where the other one was from. And it's something that I've always loved. There's a strangeness to the fact that English is the universal language at this point, travel language. For many reasons, there's a strangeness to it. One, because it's just not the easiest language. If we were going to pick one, picking one that is just a little bit more straightforward probably would have made sense. But, just as somebody whose native tongue is English, there's an experience, there's a privilege and an ease to traveling. And it's every year it has gotten more privileged and easier as more and more people, learn English all over the world. Now you kind of really can go almost anywhere and be okay, right? Someone will speak it in most places. It wasn't quite always the case 10, 20 years ago, but now it's like, and so I kind of know everywhere I go, I'm going to be able to interact with people, and especially other travelers. And there's a beauty and a magic in that, and also something where it's like, I've never really had to fully experience what it feels like to be, if your native language is Italian, just say, and then you've learned English, but now you're in Costa Rica, so it's like everything's in Spanish, but you speak Italian, which is kind of like Spanish, but it's not at all. And now you're speaking in English, even though you're in a Spanish-speaking country, but everybody speaks English. Like, it's just this really beautiful thing to me, and it's such a, I just think it's an incredible thing that so many other travelers are able to do. And I've always found this particular fondness in watching 2 people from different places on earth in a country that is neither of their homes, right, speaking to each other in English. And again, they're not using Spanish, they're in a Spanish speaking country, and it's just, yeah. And I all this to say, I just remember watching that and being like, it was one of those things that, like, I couldn't have said or articulated before that moment about what I missed, what made me feel alive about being other places. And just like, in an instant walking in, I'm like, oh, this is it, right? And that night, because I had a single room, and I've never loved hostels. I remember falling asleep, and the bed, when like you don't totally dry fabric and it gets that kind of like musty smell. Sometimes clothes have it. Sometimes, yeah, the bed and everything in Costa Rica, it's so humid. Like, it's actually really hard to dry things all the way. But the bed had that smell, and it wasn't so bad that I was like, this is like not sanitary, but it was enough that I was laying there and I was like, okay, I don't feel totally clean. I don't love this. I can hear other people in the hostel because it is a hostel, and I'm like, I want to go to bed because I'm an old lady at 29. And so it's like that discomfort then, right? It's like, this is, it's one of the million things that I love about traveling, and where for me, travel is such a, like, growing experience. It's such a practice in consciousness. It's such a practice in self exploration and expansion, right? Because discomfort is the place where you learn and grow. Whatever is uncomfortable for you, your ability to sit in that, to face it, to transmute it, that is where your growth is. For me, travel is like a freaking, like, pressure cooker of discomfort and wonder, right? And you get the highs and the lows. Like, that day, it was that, like, trepidation of getting on the plane, but then the amazing, the feeling of leaving U.S. airspace, and then, oh my god, the wild and wonderful thing of stepping out of the airport, and then, the people are speaking different languages, and it's these highs and these, and then all of a sudden going to bed and being like, everyone's loud and this smells, and like, what am I doing, and oh my god, like, I'm actually here, and like, what's happening, and I'm kind of spiraling, right? Like, literally kind of spiraling in that night. If you're reading my journals on Patreon, like, you can see it, and it's like, I know this is part of it, and I know that I love this, and also I'm like, this feels really not great in this moment. And that's, one of the million things that I love about intentional travel, right? Is just that, like, yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable, and what are you going to do about it, right? How are you going to take this and learn and grow and sit in it and allow it? Yeah. So I'm going to wind it down. Um, that is the how I got to Costa Rica, metaphorically, literally, all around. Um, I had also, I will mention this because I believe it will be the first integration episode as well. But the month leading up to leaving, I had done my first Whole30. And if you're unfamiliar with a Whole30, it's basically, it's more or less like an elimination diet, that people use to help find foods that they might not realize are that they're intolerant to. So basically, you spend 30 days eating very, very, very cleanly. Fruits, vegetables. If you eat meat, meat is allowed, but I do not. But there's no dairy, there's no wheat, there's no rice, no soy, no legumes, which as a vegan was very interesting. For a month, I've actually done a few Whole30s, but yeah, that was interesting. Um, Nothing processed, right? No seed oils, no added sugar, no alcohol. Like, it's basically just like very, very pure foods. And so I had spent March doing my first ever Whole30, and I've always been somebody who feels very called to, come to understand my body and how to best nourish her. And I've had a lot of, it's been a journey. Like, my relationship with my body and with food was very, 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 very distorted for a very long time. And I was always called to figure out what the balance was, right? And all of this to say, I firmly believe isn't the word. I know that what we consume, and that's in every form, right? It's literally what you put in your body, what you eat, but also what you watch, what you listen to, everything that you consume, everything that you put into your vessel, into your mind, impacts you, impacts every part of you. It's all connected. Um, and when we are, and this is not to say, everybody must eat perfectly at all times. Like, that's not at all what this is. Everyone's on their own journey, and we're all doing the best that we can. And Lord knows we have been conditioned to not be able to do this very easily. But that I have come to find, right, when we are very intentional about what we're consuming and really kind of clear out our vessel in that way, especially with the intention of kind of being open to receive, right? Because intention really matters with everything that we do. But the way that we are able to kind of be open to energy, to our own consciousness, to the universe, to the messages that are coming through, it is much easier to be in that connection when we are not clouded with very low density things, right? And this is, I mean, this is scientific and it's also energetic. This is like, it's where that, like, yeah, kind of the spiritual stuff and the science stuff are all kind of figuring each other out right now, which is cool to see. But all of this to say, I, in this current that I had kind of stepped into, and the magic and the everything that was just kind of aligning in this way, a large part of that was, I know, due to the fact that I had spent this month kind of intentionally cleansing myself and really opening up my consciousness to what was around, and I didn't know these things were connected. Right at the start of March, I had no idea that I was going to Costa Rica. I had no idea I was going on this journey. I had no idea anything. I was just like, I feel very called to like just experiment with what it feels like to eat in this way for 30 days. Um yeah. And so that's who and where and what I was leading up to and at the very start of getting to Costa Rica. And in the next trip, we will discuss going to Puerto Viejo and everything that opened up there and the true start of this journey. Thank you for being here, and thank you to everybody who supports this on Patreon. For $3 a month, you can help support me and this project that I'm doing. And I'm also publishing all of my journals. So if you would like to read where my mind was at the time, because it's one thing to hear me talk about all of this now, right, as the version who is able to talk about this, who can look back and understand, like, oh yeah, that is what was happening and how I felt, and but I can now, of course, I can see the through lines, and I've healed a bunch of the stuff, and so there isn't the I still feel it all, but it doesn't feel the way that it felt then. And so if you're curious about what the actual experience was like, the ups and the downs, and what the inner workings of my mind were as I was really coming to, put all of this together, all of my journals are being published on Patreon, and you can read them there. And again, thank you for everybody who's supporting there. And you can find me on Substack and Instagram and kind of all over the internet. The link is in the notes of the show. Great. I will see you next time. I love you so much, and you are doing so great.